Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us again today. As always, I am excited to share our guest with you. But before we do, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com, a Quinn the Eskimo company. When we as musicians are looking for brass and wind instruments, we always start with brassandwinds.com. They've been very helpful to us over the years, and we're happy to recommend them to you. Brassandwinds.com. Would you like to learn how to play the piano for free online? Please come check us out at truermu, truermu.com. Would you rather study with a person? Come to willowschoolga.com. Either way, we'd be happy to help you. We're looking forward to seeing you there at truermu or willowschoolgeorgia.com. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest to you. His name is Chad Hale. He's the founding director of Urban Recipe and the executive director of the Georgia Avenue Community Ministry. He served as the pastor for the Georgia Avenue Church till 2005. And I'd like to give you a little background as to why he's with us today, since a lot of the people on our shows tend to be musicians. I have known Chad Hale for many years, and I have a book called Motherless Child, which I shared with him because I wanted to get his perspective on it. Well, he turned right around and he shared a book with me. And I read his book. His book is called Forgive Us This Day Our Daily Bread. Can a Comfortable Church Remember Jesus? Well, after waiting way too long, I read his book and I was very moved by it. And as he is a fellow creative, I thought it would be fascinating. I was interested in the book because I'm an educator who has spent just a little time in situations of poverty and also a musician who spent a lot of time in churches. So there was a lot there that I could gravitate to. But the book was absolutely fascinating, and so is my guest. I'd like to welcome Mr. Chad Hale, Dr. Chad Hale. Dr. Chad Hale?
Not doctor, pastor, reverend, whatever.
Pastor Chad Hale, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Adam. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me to join with you in this conversation.
I'm happy to have you. Could you tell us, first of all, how did you come to the ministry?
I was raised in the South, in Dallas, Texas, start out with. And my mother was in the church. My father wasn't particularly. So I was immersed in the church, didn't have any choice in that, got started out that way, and eventually began to take it seriously. Somehow it began to get a hold of me. Some of what I felt was at the core of it, and I got to the place I felt this was. I guess we say in our within our groups here a calling.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt called to the ministry. I tested that over the years, various ways, but couldn't get free of it. So,
How do you test something like that?
well, I went in one case. I went and took another job just to see if I wouldn't be happy with it, and actually worked at Walter Reed Army Medical Center for a while. I got on a career path there in civilian recruiting, and it just didn't work for me. After a year, I was able to be with and around poor people, and that's always been an issue for me, race and poverty issues. But I couldn't have any real interaction with them. It was just paperwork and, helping people get situated and so forth. And I knew that I needed something a little more expansive, a little broader.
And so, was your first ministry here in Georgia, or were you?
Uh, After I went to seminary in Boston,
Mhm.
and my first position was as an associate pastor in a church in Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
So I started out in New England, but I always knew I wanted to return to the South. As I've alluded to already, racial issues have just been something I haven't been able to escape from childhood, to tell you the truth. And I felt like I know the language of the South. This is where I'm used to. It's my culture. I felt like I could speak and work in that culture. And eventually I was asked to form a church here in Atlanta, Georgia, by the American Baptist churches, of which I became an ordained member, and decided to answer that request and came on down in 1974.
Before we talk about the ministry that you created down here in Georgia, I'm very curious. I'd like you to talk to me a little bit about your experience of race. Apparently, it was a profound one upon you from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, being 75, I was born in an era of heavy Jim Crow stuff. And my memories are more from my earliest memories of really coming into contact with this, related more to being in Cedar Hill, Texas, which was a little town south of Dallas. I was in the church, but I just the ways the white community, of which of course I was a part, and my folks, the ways people would talk about or talk to African American people, for some reason, I didn't like. It rubbed me wrong. I have no idea why. Honestly, I can't say why I didn't just buy into it. I can't take any credit for that. I don't know why. But for whatever reason, it was problematic to me. And I thought, I'm in the church, I'm seeing these scriptures that say, love your neighbor as yourself. And in my church, it clearly means white neighbor. It didn't mean everybody. Somehow or another, that began to dawn and work in me. And so it's just stayed with me. Couldn't get free of it.
Now, there's there was a myth. I think it may be dispelled now, but the myth was that racism was primarily, a Southern issue, and that if you were up in Rhode Island, there was no such issue. What did you experience in Rhode Island that, was it simply that there were fewer African Americans in that church, or was there something different about the way things were up there that made you feel like you were needed more down here?
What made me feel I was needed more down here was that I was so comfortable there.
Oh.
It was honestly an idyllic place. I was in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, wonderful people, upper middle class. The church itself was. The apartment that I had, I could look out on the bay. It was just beautiful. But I was restless. It didn't, the church itself, just such gracious people. But there was no real interaction with, you wouldn't know there were any poor people at all in the town. And yet there were some down below, further down toward the docks and so forth. So when I had the opportunity, that restlessness just allowed me to grasp that and go with it,
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that the people wanted me to leave. In fact, they came back to me some years later asking me if I would come back as the actual senior pastor. That wasn't, as I say, that just not what was in my heart.
Yeah. So you came down, and that's when you came to Georgia?
Well, originally, my family moved to Georgia in 1953. When, I got that right? No, 58. I was 13. So we moved to Atlanta for 4 years. So there's kind of an interesting little piece in that. My father worked for the Frito company in Dallas. And he actually invented the machinery that makes Fritos.
Wow, that's really interesting.
That processes them in a faster way than the ways they were doing it before, so they could be mass produced. Now, I don't think that's particularly common knowledge. The two brothers that inherited the Frito company had a fight. They were the Doolins, Doolin. Daddy was close to the one that left. So he and the brother went, and the one he was close to, formed another company called Circle D. It failed. It didn't do anything like the Frito company has done. And Daddy ended up being hired by different snack companies to come start them making corn chips. Of course, they couldn't call them Fritos.
Right.
So the first company he came to was a man named I.J. Filler here in Atlanta. And then we moved up to Pennsylvania for 4 years, and he ended up with the Dandy Potato Chip Company in Columbus, Ohio, where my mother lived until she passed just a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Oh, my condolences to you.
So that's been, so we moved around a bit, and that's when I first came to Atlanta and was here for 4 years.
Okay. And then you came back. Did you come to it? Did you decide Atlanta was where you would go when you left Rhode Island?
No, it wasn't, except, I mean, when I was in Rhode Island, I had to wait on, who would hire me, whatever. And I had another church in New England calling me to consider being the pastor. But at the same time, I got this call from Atlanta wanting to know if I would be interested in starting a new church in the South, because American Baptists, not anywhere near as big as Southern Baptists, who are ubiquitous, of course. So the American Baptists were much more racially diverse, and more of them were moving to the South at that point. So they wanted a church that would be formed that would appeal more to, honestly, this is kind of interesting, more to middle class and more white people from the American Baptists who were coming to Atlanta, who weren't going to join the American Baptist African American churches, which is mostly what American Baptist churches were in the South. So it's a very mixed thing. And I didn't really want to do that. And fortunately, there was a person who was in charge of helping form new churches, who had a different vision and offered me that vision of forming a small house church that would be much more inclusive. And we called it the Atlanta Inclusive Fellowship. And it was more inclusive. And it eventually, through many pathways, became Georgia Avenue Church.
So that's where the book comes in. Your book, Forgive Us This Day Our Daily Bread. It took me a while. I don't think I caught the funniness of the title. If you were not paying attention in the audience, of course, the prayer is give us this day our daily bread. And there's an interesting story behind why it's called Forgive Us This Day. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I came to the area. I ended up in Grant Park in 78. Well, in 78, a lot of people who could were leaving. They felt it was considered to be sort of a crime-ridden, unappealing area, one to get away from if you could. We bought our first house, Barbara and I, in 1981 for $18,000. So obviously things have changed a lot. Over the years, though, as I was pastoring here, the church itself was very diverse. Many of our members were quite poor, black, white. We were a real mix of folks, from fundamentalists to feminists. It was a hard group to hold together. And I didn't do so well over many years. But one of the things we were looking for was, how do we minister in this situation in a way that has integrity, that doesn't just continue the old racial patterns, the patronizing stuff, the condescending ways that we have related.
Okay.
And
some people are actually blind to that. They're in these patterns and they're not even aware that they are patterns. Can you point out some things that perhaps somebody might not even realize was a pattern that they just thought was the way it is. What are you discussing?
Well, one of the things that I think of in that situation is it would be very easy for me as a white pastor to form a food cooperative where I was just handing out food to people in need, many of whom were African American people. And I could feel very good about that. I could just be handing out food. They would be saying, thank you, thank you. And they might feel humiliated about it. They wouldn't be contributing anything. There would be no exchange there. I would just feel good about giving them something. And they had to take whatever I gave them, not having any choice about what it was or how long it would last. And my goodness, I just had all the goodies on my side in one way. It was patronizing, an easy way to relate and feel good about doing it. And the other part about that was I didn't really have to get involved in their lives. I didn't have to really know them, what was really going, why were they in this situation? I didn't have to be touched or really threatened. I could be relatively safe while feeling good about doing it. So does that help?
Oh, yes. So it raises the question, why in the world wouldn't you want to do that? Your book is full of stories about you chose the other path. You chose, in fact, to get involved. You chose to make yourself vulnerable and threatened. And some of the stories are quite profound. They're very moving, and some are actually scary. Why did you put yourself in that situation?
Well, these were my neighbors. You know, I'm under the command to love my neighbor as myself. And if I'm going to take that seriously and not limit who neighbor is, which mostly we do, of course, we limit it to people that we know will be safe for us, we're comfortable with. That's not what the Old Testament and the New Testament call us to. So having that kind of neighbor and having them call on us and looking for a way to actually relate, as I say, with integrity, I found a model. I didn't invent the model. Many people have thought I did because we ended up being the only people doing it after a while. That was a food cooperative for low-income families. That was an alternative to a food pantry. And in this model, people became members. They chose to become members. And you would meet every other week. You would get a lot of food. And you, who became the members, would be running the co-op. After a while, we would find out who are the leaders here. Who are the people that are good with math that can be the treasurers to take up the funds? Who are the people who are caring about the ways they organize the food so they're not just favoring their friends or their family, so that this is a just organization? So when you do that, I had to be there. I had to be in the mix. I had to know who the people were to find the leaders who were among the folks and put them in charge. So my life began to be intertwined with theirs. And it was a great blessing, honestly. I learned so much from people who were poor. If you're middle class and you got money in the bank, you relate to God one way. If you're poor and you don't know how to, if you're going to be able to pay the rent or have food for yourself, your children, your grandchildren, you relate to God at a whole different level. You are crying out to God. It's a living faith. And I got caught up in that. I mean, I never was rich. The church itself was never large. And I guess I felt like my calling was to go, as they say, socially downward instead of upward. But I had to share. I couldn't, if you get to know and love people, It's all about relating. And
Mhm.
if you're willing to relate, you become transformed. It's it's scary, but it's life-giving. So then you begin to be in people's homes. You begin to be in areas that are threatening. And I had something to bring to it, but also they brought a lot to me in terms of the depth of their love, their care. How many grandmothers did we have that just took in children from their own children that got on drugs, or nieces or nephews that were incapacitated one way or another? My gosh, they were heroic in ways I couldn't think of being. And I had the honor of serving them by setting up a program that would provide them a lot of food and help. I mean, the average income of our co-op members was under $12,000 a year. So you think about the pressure that puts on somebody. And we would be providing as much as $4,000 a year in food for nothing, basically. People would pay a very small, like $2, $3, $4 over the years that changed, sort of a handling fee. It was a way to make a contribution instead of it just feeling like a handout. And they did the work in the co-op. So they did it. This white pastor didn't do it for everybody. We did this together. They knew it was theirs. They elected their own officers. But if you do that, you're adding a lot, relatively speaking, to people's income. And so that people told us this much food that I don't have to put my food stamps, or I don't have to put my whatever budget money I've got toward, means I can pay my mortgage or my rent, or I can keep my utilities on, or whatever. So it made a difference in people's lives. And then it was a stepping stone for some people to join the church that otherwise would not have, because they felt welcomed in the space and honored. Respect was a huge word for us. One of the important ways of translating love is respect, that we treated each other that way, and our members had to treat each other that way. We didn't require people to be Christians, but the truth is most of our members either were or came from Christian backgrounds, but we tried to honor everyone wherever they came from. And I think we did a fairly good job at that. And it wasn't a place where people could be proselytized. So, we had a few folks that would try to muscle people in. Oh, you gotta come to Jesus or you're going to hell. And he said, wait a minute, man, that's not what we're about here. You can't do that. We're here to honor and love people just the way they are. If you're Muslim, you're going to be able to pray in the meeting too if you want to, whatever it is. So it was a great program, and I benefited much from it. Many families did and have, and it's ongoing. COVID has of course messed us up in many ways, from being able to relate closely, but it'll get started in again. And I'm just honored that we could do it. And we ended up being, as I say, the only people doing that for a long time. So people began to come to us. And because our church was so little, many people would do an old faith ministry kind of support. People would send money to us. So I needed to communicate with them some way. That was the genesis of the newsletters, which are the heart of that book that you have brought to the fore here, Adam.
Yes. Now, having read the book and also having been in a very few situations of poverty and danger, not as many as you, but enough, I'm going in with my eyes open. And yet I'm going to be honest with you, even just listening to you talk, it brings me to the abyss. It scares me to hear you talk about these things. It's my human reaction. I am a fairly comfortable person and I've lived a comfortable life. And to hear you speak truthfully about these people, it has an effect on me that I tend to want to push away. I would prefer to think of people in poverty either as heroes or as people who are deserving of the situation that brought them down. And neither is true. And I found that out by reading your book, just what a spectrum of people there were in there. And that also was a challenge for me, that there was a spectrum and that the spectrum was a lot like any spectrum of society. Can you talk about that?
No, that's you stated well. And I go back to that word relating. When you begin to know people, you begin to know their hearts. You see the struggles out of which they come, the life situations they've been in. You begin to see the huge injustice that has been just poured on to people. And I think it's poor people in general in many ways, but especially you think of people who were imported here because of their race to be slaves, and the long river, the path, the history of that. It's just astounding. And you begin to feel that, then you begin to have compassion. You begin to have understanding and empathy and sympathy for people's situations. I know one of our co-op leaders, what an amazing woman, powerful woman. She talked to me one time just about the depths of shame of being Black in this society, of what the messages she had gotten and how they had gone into her heart and soul. And this was an amazing woman, honestly, talking about the work to dig out of that. I'm not sure I'm really getting at your question, but the more I got to know people and love them, and they love me, it was a transforming thing for me, and I think for them. Our poor people and our African American people that were here when I came, they're used to white people coming and going. They're used to white Christian heroes coming in and out, talking about how they ministered, how many turkeys they gave out at Thanksgiving, or whatever they did. And so when I came in, nobody's going to trust me. I'm just one more white guy, with the same words. But as I stayed, I felt like it was important to root, to stay in a place, to be faithful. And that made a difference. Over the years, people saw I wasn't just trying to use them. I wasn't embezzling the funds. I wasn't trying to get their women in the bed. It was, they knew me. They knew I related pretty much as an equal as best I could. Because that's what I felt. That gradually made a place for me in the community, so that I never felt unsafe going into situations of what would I say, apartment complexes that were dark, where there were people, there were gunshots or whatever. I don't know. I felt like I had to go where I had to go and trust what was going to happen. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that was what I was called to, and I think God was with me in it. It's funny, Adam, you were asking about race. You touched on racism in the North. When I was going to seminary, I lived in the North End, right near Old North Church on Hanover Street. Well, at that time, that was the densest population per acre in the US. And it was an Italian, it was Little Italy. There were people there that just got off the boat, didn't even speak English. And I was put I was in a building there in the Baptist City Society. I was a student. I'd really come from suburban and rural South. I didn't know the city like that. And I had friends from Harvard and others that were, you know, I would walk down the street with, and I did not realize how much attention I was getting. And the word got out that I was going to move Black people into the North End. And late one night, when I was coming back from a gathering with some friends in the house that I lived with, a gang met me and tried to kill me. So I got a real strong taste of racism in the North. In a way I haven't actually had in the South. I've gotten in some trouble in the South, but not like that. So it is everywhere. So
That's an extraordinary story, and very, very relevant. You talk about being transformed, and you've hinted at this transformation, but I'd like you to actually talk about what you were transformed into and perhaps what your community members were transformed into.
I think transformed more into deeper trust of God, not having to just make sure I've amassed enough wealth for me and my kids, that I see, because I've been in situations where I myself didn't always have enough, but somehow or another, a way has always been made. It hasn't always been easy. Sometimes it wasn't, and it hasn't been magical, but I think I just became a little more real. Our co-op members are, one thing about I find is my poorer members, friends, they don't put on airs the way they're not as sort of insulated and buttoned down, not as worried about image and stuff. You know, the nicknames are just right out there. Big head, fat, 19, rat trap. I mean, they're just wild. And people would just say anything. People might tell me, hardly knowing me at all, would just begin to talk to me about their sexual problems or whatever, or mental things, or what was going on with their family members, health or whatever. And it was just free, honest. I think I got freer not to just be who I am, mm-hmm. And not to try to hide and create, put out an image. I mean, us preachers are great at that. It's an important thing to us, putting out an image. And obviously, I'm in one way or another, I'm putting out one now. But
are you? Do you think that's true? What image are you putting out now? Is that true?
I don't think I should. I probably said that wrong. Obviously, I have an image coming forward. I hope I'm not sort of consciously right now trying to sell a particular persona, but I think those are, and I guess I got transformed into being freer to go, I guess, into maybe less safe situations or relate to people that, no, you were a little afraid to touch. I've been around our folks with our Wednesday meal that we've done so long, and how many of those people came through there with TB or whatever, I don't know. And yet I couldn't not embrace them. I couldn't keep my distance. that
So you put yourself at risk of tuberculosis, is what you're saying.
or whatever people
Yeah.
had, whatever they were bringing in. Or somebody, people would get angry at times. Or they'd pull out a knife or whatever. You just had to deal with it. Um, and I don't know. I felt like this is my place. I'm not going to run. This is where I'm supposed to be. I'll pray in the moment
Yeah.
and hope that I get through this and that we all get through it well.
Now,
Because there were some threatening people, there were threatening situations. And the other side of that is there was times that parts of the neighborhood didn't want us to be here. As the neighborhood began to gentrify and got more affluent, we got pushback, people saying, we're going to drive you out. So we had to deal with that as well.
how did you deal with that? I was going to ask you about not only interacting with people that were threatening you, but also interacting with people whose support you needed. How real could you be with those people? When did you have to create a persona to make it palatable to them to give money, or for other pastors to even want to speak to you?
Um, no, as far as people contributing, that just kind of grew over the years. People that had a similar concern or heart for people who had, and sometimes they weren't people who had a lot. But little by little, it grew that certain churches would support our work or individuals would. And I won't go into all the particulars, but that's just been kind of a growing thing. And I know from having read the book, there were moments we didn't know if we were going to be open the next month. I didn't know if I was going to get paid or whatever. And there were actually times I didn't, but somehow or another, we still got through. As to the community, I had to be careful. I couldn't decided that if I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, that also includes those who are affluent and don't want me to be here. So how do I love them as well? And how do I not just be self-righteous and call them up and blast them as a schmuck or whatever, but say, yes, let's get together and let's talk. And some would and some wouldn't. But try to treat them with care as well. I know we had one neighbor across the street from us, and people would blame us if their cars got broken into or so forth. Honestly, I felt like we helped hold down crime because we were seeing some people give up their addictions because they were in a community and felt cared for and had the food they needed or whatever. They didn't have to be maybe stealing if they had been in some cases, but nevertheless, we were a target. So people would say, well, you're bringing these people in. Well, they live all around us. We're not bringing them in. They were here first. You're the one that came later, and you bring in your stuff. But in any case, I know we had one neighbor said, I'm going to get up a petition and begin to try to drive you out. And I said, okay, you've got to do what you've got to do. And I called her and I said, well, I'd like to visit with you. And I waited a few days before I did it. And I bought some flowers and I went over and she began by apologizing. She said, that was wrong. I know that's not really the case. And I invited her to come meet some of our co-op members, and she did. She came and had a wonderful time at a potluck meal that we had and began to form some relationships. But, you just try to be patient, and because I know people can be threatened and do the best you can. Be as
I,
caring on both sides of the equation.
I think this is the transformation that I was asking about. It seems like you became a person who was more capable of creating relationships where there hadn't been any. And that extended within a community of poverty and extending out. And of course, it isn't perfect. There's tons of places that should be
Yeah.
reached that are not. But these stories you're telling tell me that you were able to reach inside other people's hearts because yours was open.
Well, I pray so. Uh, I I think it's kind of been that way, and I don't even understand all of how that happened or why, but I do care for people, and I do want to be faithful to love people. That's the calling and the command. Um, but it's a work, of course, and we
Work
don't
with
do a good job at it.
Well, work without control. I mean, it sounds like you say you don't know how it happened, but you just did it. It sounds like you ceded control of the process, ceded a need to feel like you needed to run it, to be in charge of everything that happened. Say, no, you can't do that. You can't think that. Stay out of this. It sounds like you gave over to a higher authority in this situation.
Well, I'd like to think so. Yeah. I think you're right. I think there were larger forces at work.
Yeah. So to access those larger forces, it sounds like there is a certain frame of mind that's necessary.
Well, I know that I want that frame of mind. I think would be one of trying to be faithful, trying to be. I mean, I think we all read the scriptures, whatever our faith is. We read them selectively. That's dangerous. We see so much of the Christian church is so off base right now. I guess it always has been in ways, and I think it's probably true in every religion. We want to use God instead of letting God use us. And so now Christianity is in the service of nationalism, so much of it in our country. Well, Jesus is not about nationalism. There's nothing about it. He's made it clear. I'm not about land and bloodlines. I'm about the spirit and love. So if you endeavor to pray and ask for help of the spirit to be open to what the scripture is really calling for, what God is really calling for, then that the spirit answers some way. The spirit enables that some way. It brings other people to help break you. It brings things you can learn, courses, other wise people, people who have wisdom, people who have humility. And little by little, you learn. So I'm thankful I've had many teachers, many good teachers. It's all about community and it's all about love. It really is.
And I think this is what differentiates your book from just a series of anecdotes about poor people is this thing that you're telling your donors, because these are letters to your donors. And this is what you're saying again and again. You're not picking the stories and choosing them. You're not manicuring the stories. And throughout, you're saying the same thing that you've been saying, this thing that you're learning. That I can't even articulate. You just articulated it very well, and I'm going to have to watch the interview again to hear it. That you come in contact with people who break you, who open you, who soften you, and that there's something in that that's valuable and important.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm honored you would want to talk about this, Adam. I do feel, I am concerned about the mainline church. That's the church I was brought up in. I feel like it's one of the most important themes in the scriptures, in all the way through, from Genesis to Revelation, is about poverty and those who are poor. The very first people of God were slaves, the Hebrew children freed from Egypt. You can't get much lower, you know?
Yeah.
And that Jesus' very first sermon that's recorded in Luke is, I came to bring good news to the poor. And yet we have wanted to shove that theme to the background and make poor people charity objects instead of people, not invite them in our churches to relate to. We just relate to the ones that we're comfortable with. So as you can see by the title of the book, I'm addressing it to the church. And I feel like overall, we're pretty unfaithful, but we struggle with it. It's always been a struggle. The prophets of the Old Testament can tell you that. It's not anything new. It's an ongoing struggle for the spirit of love to really have its way and to be at the fore and in leadership. We want to control it, and it won't really be controlled.
Wow. Well, I would like other people to have the opportunity to be transformed by your book. Tell us how we can find Forgive Us This Day Our Daily Bread, Can a Comfortable Church Remember Jesus? How do we find that book?
Well, thank you. It's on Amazon. I was in too big a hurry. I didn't want to wait around for publishers, and I just put it out there myself. You can find it on Amazon under my name, Chad Hale, and the title, Forgive Us This Day Our Daily Bread.
Well, as everybody knows, self-publishing is publishing. So I'm a big advocate for that. So there's no quality issues with the book. If anybody's wondering, it's just a book. And I encourage people to find it. Chad Hale, Hale, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Chad Hale, thank you so much for sharing the book with me, for the work you have done. I know you perhaps don't feel like you deserve thanks because it puts you in a place that is not where you want to be, but I am grateful for the work you have done that sometimes I have not been brave enough to do. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Adam, and again for inviting me into this conversation. And I have to say, from the things, reading your book, Motherless Child, and the things I've watched on the computer of some of your essays, some of your blogs, and some of your YouTubes, you have contributed so much to so many, and I'm thankful to you.
You're very kind. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today on our show. We have lots of other guests coming, and we're looking forward to sharing them with you. Thanks very much. If you need to find me, you can find me at adam@willowschoolga.com or truermu. It's been a pleasure, and have a great day.